Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we're taking a look at a few odd cards from all over the market, continuing on with some of the early effects of Power of the Elements. Now, not all of these cards are going to be big name cards. Some of them are going to be smaller pieces that you may not have thought about recently, but nevertheless they are definitely important cards for you all to keep on your radar at your locals, both as cards to pick up and hold on to, or to offload while they're getting some attention. Let's get started. Kicking things off, we have Primeval Planet Perlarino, which is the Tearlament field spell. This is actually an extremely important card for the Tearlament strategy. It provides consistency by searching for a Tearlament monster on activation, and then when a Tearlament monster is put from the graveyard back into the deck, you get to pop a card for free as well. It's absolutely a 3-of in the strategy, and with all of the success that Tearlaments are seeing over in the OCG, it should come as absolutely no surprise that this is one of the most hyped up cards to come out of Power of the Elements. Now, early on, we were seeing this card quite cheap. I believe it was down between like $45 and $50 each. However, over time, we've seen the card climb up in price quite a bit on TCG Player to where the card is now sitting between $75 and $80 each. So over in the OCG, when Power of the Elements first dropped, sprites were kind of like tier 0, while Tearlaments did lag behind, and it really took until after the ban list that saw Totally Awesome and Halki Fibrex get banned, and then the release of the Ishizu cards before Tearlaments were able to take over the game. However, the TCG and OCG are obviously extremely different. Sprites here cannot search for max C, and I think that Tearlaments will see about even success with sprites during the early format over the next couple of months. That being said, it should be no surprise that Tearlaments and sprites have Perlarino and Sprite Blue sitting atop the set at $80 or higher, since they are each 3-ofs for 2 of the strongest decks coming to the game in a brand new set. Honestly, given how strong Tearlaments are looking, don't expect this card to get any cheaper anytime soon. If you want to play the deck, you are probably going to have to suck it up and pay it up for the card. The next card we have is Dimension Shifter, one of the most polarizing hand traps in the entire game. Now, on one hand, it's only really useful on turn 0 since you have to have no other cards in your graveyard in order to activate it, but it says that any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead, which completely shuts off any graveyard dependent strategy. So already this is a hand trap that the Fluwandereeze deck is using, since they're able to hit decks like Sword Soul and Despio with it, and it doesn't really affect them. Now, as the meta is shifting, this card has become a mainstay in Exosister deck lists who don't need to use the graveyard at all. Both sprites and Tearlaments want to be able to use the graveyard in order to play the game, though Tearlaments are definitely more dependent on it, and Dimension Shifter is a big part of how Exosisters are able to keep up with the meta. As a result, we've seen another surge upwards in the price of Dimension Shifter. It initially got a bunch of attention after Fluwandereeze got bigger, and then it fell back down, and now the card is back up to $13 each. We do want to keep in mind that part of the reason for that decline is that Dimension Shifter got a reprint in the Crystal Beast structure deck over in the OCG, and a lot of people are speculating that we could see a similar reprint here in the TCG, since the card currently only has 1 printing available. However, there is never a guarantee that this OCG deck list will be copied to the TCG completely. That being said, if you guys do have extra copies of Dimension Shifter that you're not planning on using, or if you're not planning on playing the card at all, I would definitely consider offloading the card and then buying back the reprints in a couple of months. If you want to play Exosisters, you probably need to hold on to at least a set of this card though. Do keep in mind, however, that even if it does get reprinted, the original secrets will always retain more value than the reprint commons, so don't feel too bad about holding on to a set for yourself to use. Alright, the next card I want to talk about is Nibiru the Primal Being. So this card isn't exactly trending right now. I think that historically, Nibiru has been for the most part between $10 to $15 in price. There are times where it gets slightly more or less expensive, but the price has been fairly steady ever since this card's release a few years ago. And this is still the same now, right? The card has 2 secret rare printings and a gold rare printing that are each about $13. And then of course it has the ultimate rare printing that we aren't going to talk about for today. So the reason I do want to bring up Nibiru though, is because I believe that Nibiru is a card you guys should be actively looking to offload if you have extra copies of it. As great of a card as Nibiru is generally, I think it's not going to be a great card for the next couple of formats with sprites and Tearlaments running around. Sprites can prevent it naturally with Gigantic Sprite, and then Tearlaments are able to make Winda to prevent it from activating as well. Sure, it might be useful in other matchups, but with those 2 decks expected to take up a big portion of the meta, it probably isn't going to see as much play, and with the emphasis on board breakers like Dark Ruler No More instead of hand traps, Nibiru just might not be a good enough card for the time being. With that being said, I am expecting these lower rarity versions of Nibiru to drop in price over the next half a year, and maybe get extremely low if the card were to see a reprint within that time as well. Of course, that may present a great buying opportunity if the card's price does tank, since I don't think the card will be bad forever. It just isn't going to be a great option in the format that we're heading into. So yeah, you will probably still want to hold a set of Nibiru for yourself to use, since Nibiru is kind of like a staple hand trap that you have to have ready to use in any given format, kind of like Ash Blossom, right? I just don't think it's something that you're going to want to hold on to very many copies of right now. Speaking of board breakers, the next card we have is the Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere Mode. This is a pretty cool card. It's kind of like a lava golem or a kaiju, but you get to tribute 3 monsters on your opponent's side of the field. It's also a tribute summon rather than a special summon, right? So you get to get rid of something like a Vanity's Ruler in the Drytron matchup, maybe an El Shaddai Winda in the tier limit matchup if those ever come up. Sphere Mode is something that people are starting to look at as a really good side deck option versus decks like Sprite and Tier Limits, an effective card to use as a board breaker rather than a hand trap where you're trying to stop your opponent from setting up in the first place. Sphere Mode actually has several different printings, but all of them are actually up a decent amount in terms of price right now. There is the Ghost Rare from the most recent Ghost from the Past set. Those were down at around $55 to $60, but with the surge in interest because the card might potentially see meta play, Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere Mode in Ghost Rare is actually almost up to $100 a piece, which is more than Ghost Rares like Dark Arm Dragon and Red Eyes Black Dragon, kinda crazy. The card also has 3 other printings, and at one point, like the supers from the special edition and the ultras from Dual Power were quite cheap, like around $4 to $5. Now you're looking at paying $13 to $15 for either of these super or ultra rare printings. In my mind, this is like a big reprint target. I could definitely see it being an OTS tournament pack common just to increase its accessibility to the player base. Overall though, predicting like where and when a certain card is going to be reprinted is just a bit too difficult, and it's a bit too random. It's up to Konami's whim completely. So if you want to have the card available for your side deck, I think it's still reasonable to try and grab a set of the ultras or the supers for around $25 to $30 if you can negotiate the price down just a little bit. The next card I want to take a look at is Tri-Brigade Faragit the Barren Blossom. So as cool as Tri-Brigades are, they haven't really been a hot deck recently. I don't think they've had much success since Bird Up and Zodiac got hit. However, Faragit remains a useful card, namely as a dump target for Ultimate Slayer when you want to put an opponent's Link monster back into the extra deck. You can get rid of cards like Appaloosa or Boral Dragon, and then Faragit will let you draw a card and then put a card back to the bottom of the deck. It's just a thing with Yu-Gi-Oh now, where all different decks play some sort of brick or card that you don't want to see. Whether that's a copy of Driver when you're playing Cyframe Gamma, a hand trap that's being drawn just too late into the game, or some other combo piece that needs to be summoned out of the deck directly or searched, and Faragit can help to alleviate that issue. It's a solid alternative to Trouble Sunny, since you also don't need to run that brick in the main deck in order for the card to function. That being said, Faragit isn't a super old card. It was just reprinted as a secret rare in the 2021 Megatins from last year, so the card is still fairly cheap. It is up a little bit though for either the secret rare or the original ultra rare, going from under $1 a few months ago to now being $2 a piece. Obviously, this does depend on how good Ultimate Slayer is, and if you guys watched my previous market watches, you'll know that I don't think Ultimate Slayer is going to be crazy right off the bat, but it will most likely be a good card within a couple of formats. That being said, Faragit is probably a really solid pickup if you can grab them for right around $1. I wouldn't want to pick them up for anything more than that right now, but I think that down the road, there is a good chance that we could see the card as high as $5, assuming it doesn't get some sort of unexpected reprint. This next one is kind of random. We have Arch Nemesis Ishados. So for those of you that played Yu-Gi-Oh! Last year, you will remember Arch Nemesis Protos, a worm that was played in Sword Soul to lock players out of special summoning monsters of a certain attribute. Well, this card that we're looking at now is actually Protos' twin, Ishados. So the difference is that Ishados is based around types instead of attributes. So we're going to need to be a little bit more specific about what type we're going to be locking out in order for this card to be effective. However, the card is starting to see play over in the OCG. You can use it to call Aqua and stop a lot of the tier limit monsters from coming out. On top of that, we also had the Bisted archetype debut in Darkwing Blast. They're a dragon-based theme, and they have a couple of cards that can be splashed into any strategy. they're actually able to search for Ishados as well, so a lot of great synergy there. On Road of the King's metagame report, they made note of Ishados and how it's being teched into deck lists in the OCG. Of course, a lot of players in the TCG look to the OCG for an early look at techs and strategies that will eventually come here. So even though we are a few months behind, this could definitely be something that gets used here in the TCG as well. Right now, Ishados is very cheap at only $4 a piece, so it's probably not a bad pickup. Protos did get really expensive before it got banned, and even though the card is relatively new coming from Eternity Code, it has never seen a reprint either. I don't think that this is something that you want to buy hundreds and hundreds of copies of at $4 each. But if you see them in someone's binder at your locals and you can grab them for around $2 to $3 a piece, I think it's worth trading for and holding on to see if the card does see consistent success in the OCG and if that will translate here in the TCG. One last card that I want to talk about briefly at the end of today's episode is Obedience Schooled. I know it's such a random card to talk about. It's a starter for a lot of very specific beast decks. If you control no monsters, you get to special summon 3 level 2 or lower beast effect monsters from your deck, but their effects are negated and they are destroyed during the end phase, and also this card locks you into beast monsters. So I don't know how many of you guys paid attention to this, but Melfi actually got a couple of new support cards in Power of the Elements. Also, a bunch of the Melfi cards are actually level 2, so they can actually be supplemented by the Sprite cards as well. Now, I'm not saying by any means that Melfi Sprite is going to be a meta deck, but for those that want to try out the Melfi stuff, maybe like at the local level, they might have a tiny amount of success. Obedience Schooled has had a couple of different printings, 2 super rares and 1 ultra. I remember that this card was like 25 cents at one point after getting that ultra rare reprint. However, if you read the card, it literally just says you can summon 3 monsters out of your deck for free. So it's a card that I've always set aside from bulk just in case some deck is randomly able to use it. Any printing of this card is now going to cost you around $2 each. So if you do have some old bulk, hey, you probably have like a few dollars that you can dig up and then trade towards some other things. I don't think its price is going to go very much higher than this, maybe like $3, unless we get some crazy new Melfi support or someone tops a YCS with Melfi sprites. So for the most part, this is a card that you guys will just want to be aware of and have it ready to offload in case someone comes asking for it. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. My sneak weekend was actually pretty uneventful. It turns out that there were some shipping delays locally that meant that stores couldn't get the boxes on time. Hopefully you guys all had some great sneak peeks, and hopefully we'll all be able to get some great pulls when the set officially drops this upcoming weekend. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure that you let me know by slamming that thumbs up button for me. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know how you guys' sneak peek weekend went, what you guys think about the cards that we talked about in today's episode, and also let me know what other cards are trending on the market so that I can cover them in future episodes as well. Also, if you haven't already, do make sure that you hit that subscribe button to get all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself here on the channel. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.